Are you a farmer or butcher ready to master direct-to-consumer marketing and meat success? Then you're in the right place. I'm Jared Aukin, the founder of ChopLocal. Each episode of this podcast features interviews with farmers and butchers who have built successful direct-to-consumer meat businesses, and they're going to share their secrets for success with you. From actionable tips to inspiring stories, this podcast has ingredients you will need to succeed in the meat business. After the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on social. And check out the rest of our educational resources at ChopLocalUniversity.com. Now, let's turn it over to my business partner, Katie, to get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Meat Success Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Altoff, co-founder of ChopLocal and ChopLocal University. Joined here today with a guest that we have had on the podcast before. Stephen Ussery is the lead head grant writer, I'm not sure what your title is, of Stewards Unlimited. He is the grant guru that I turn to when I have grant questions. And I am currently working on, we just were awarded another grant that I'm working on, and I'm also applying for another grant, and so it is always on my mind. I thought now would be a great opportunity to get Stephen on the podcast again because there are some opportunities in the meat and local food space that are open from USDA right now. So thanks, Stephen, for hopping on again.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, Katie. Really love the content that you put out for everybody. So excited to be part of the conversation.
Well, I appreciate having people like you hop on too, because that means I don't have to do it all. I don't have to be the expert on everything myself. You can be the expert on this. So
based on your track record, you're an expert on grants. I feel very confident to recommend people to speak to you about the land grants in particular.
As we were just talking about off air, it has been a journey. I think the first time that I applied for a USDA grant was in 2021, and we did not get the grant. And at the time, I thought it was ridiculous. I thought our application was so solid. Fast forward a year later, I reread that application and all the feedback that the reviewers gave me, and I was like, no wonder we didn't get the grant. That was ridiculous. But we did get the grant in 2022. We got a Farmers Market Promotion Program grant. I recently reread that application, and still I feel like it was a little bit ridiculous, and I have grown a lot in my grant knowledge over the years. So it is something, there's typically local foods grants are available across the country, kind of coming and going year round, but there's a few big ones through USDA, and those are the ones that I've spent the most time with and definitely have learned over the years how we can kind of leverage those, and that's been partly with your help. So let's get straight into, we want to talk about the MPEP grant, which is specifically for small and very small meat processors from what I just read online. And then we will talk a little bit more about some other ones that might apply to producers or other local food organizations. But give us a rundown of kind of what the MPEP grant is. People might have heard of it before, and what the qualifications are, who should really be looking at this opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. The MPEP is the Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program. And so right now they've just released phase 4 of this program. They've had 3 other ones, and people in the meat processing space have probably heard about them over the last 2 or 3 years, largely focused on processing facilities, expansions. It could be used for things like construction equipment. Round 3 somehow focused on catfish. Round 4 is, I'm very excited for it. It's heavily focused on equipment for processors. The biggest thing is that in order to be eligible, they have a pretty narrow set of eligibility requirements. The main one of which is that you have to be engaged in the slaughter of beef in order to be eligible, right? Like you mentioned too, you have to either be small, very small, or I forget the actual word. It starts with an I. It's not intermediary, but or like the next size up, which they define as a processor with 500 or more employees, but fewer than 3,000. So truth be told, this is actually open to fairly large processors. It specifically excludes the top 4, but pretty much aside from that, I'd say most beef processors are going to be eligible for the program. You can use the funding for things beyond slaughter, but you have to have that slaughter component to be eligible.
You have to slaughter beef, but you don't have to use it for beef equipment. I'm going to throw a scenario out. If your plant slaughters beef, but you need a new smokehouse for your pork products, you could potentially use this for the equipment for the smokehouse for your pork products, but you qualify because you slaughter beef.
I think the most unfortunate thing about this is that they've split the money, and about half is going to go towards small and very small, and then half is going to go towards these intermediate processors. And so I think that depending on the number of people applying, I'm imagining that there's going to be a lot more applications from small and very small, and they only have half of the money. And, even if you're the smallest processor, you could still spend millions of dollars on equipment pretty easily. So I think that it's going to be likely a more competitive program for those small and very small applicants. I think this is something that has been really widely promoted by everybody in the meat industry. People have been talking about it for over a year. And so I think it's on a lot of people's radar. I do think it's going to be a very competitive program, although I think they've got it set up really well where it's fairly streamlined and simple. They've really narrowed down eligible uses. You can't use it to expand your footprint of your processing facility. It's going to be focused really on equipment. And then they have two different tracks, one where it also covers renovations associated with new equipment and new processing capacity. And then the other one where it's just doing the equipment. You would be handling any renovations, installation costs, things like that on your own. But based on previous programs, I really appreciate this structure. I think when there's a simplified equipment only track, I see more small scale operations be competitive for the program. It's easier for most people to manage because it's just like one equipment purchase, you get reimbursed for it versus managing contractors and things like that. So I'm excited for it. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from it. I can talk about any of the specifics of what they can and can't allow. They're expecting about 75 awards to be made. That'll be across both of them. So kind of imagine that and see where you're at. Depending on which style of project you want to approach, you can either apply for an equipment only, which is $10,000 to $250,000, or you can apply for the processing expansion project, which is including those renovation costs and installation. And that can be between $50,000 and $2 million. And that's regardless. They have a slightly unique structure that doesn't matter if you're small, very small, or intermediate. Both, that's the division between the size of the operation, and then both tracks will have those two different options. So you can see how if you're only going to have 32 awards made on average. If everybody's applying for that $2 million for the renovation, it's gonna get tight pretty fast.
I have a feeling that this program, kind of targeting plants that are harvesting beef, is partly in response to kind of the pressure about the big four packers that are controlling so much of the beef harvest in the United States, right? So do you feel like applications that are focused on processing beef, I just gave the example of using it for further pork processing, but do you feel like applications that are really focused on processing beef are going to be weighted more heavily or are going to be, preferred, or what's your feeling there?
Yeah, that would be my gut reaction. They'll obviously have some that aren't, but the current administration does seem very beef focused, right? And, I think the fact that they are including the requirement that you have to be slaughtering, I think also the fact that people who are involved in slaughter and the project at least touches on increased throughput capacity is going to make them the most competitive. Let me actually even pull up. They have a scoring rubric that you can look at to see, hey, where are all of my points? Theirs is actually a lot more broken down than most are. Most will say, hey, 0 to 10 points for this general idea. This one has, 0 to 2 points for this and 0 to 4 points for this. They have a lot of very specific line items. And so That I think is actually a blessing, because if you're considering applying for this, it's a lot easier for you to go and look through and say, how well do I match with this? Or talk with somebody like Katie. Or I really love the Flower Hill Institute. They provide free technical assistance to meat processors, and they can like talk through some of these ideas. I obviously could as well, and understand how do you compare maybe to the industry in general, and how competitive, how likely are you to score points in each of these categories. But one of them, if you're doing the simplified equipment only grants, they have up to 20 points. You can get up to 4 points for how well you align with, they have like 6 goals, right? And so at most, if you align with 5 of those goals, is kind of like the way that I view it, is the people who are aligning with 5 are going to be immediately ahead of everybody else. And it's 1, to increase processing capacity and promote more competition in the sector with an emphasis on diversifying and strengthening the supply chain. So if you're increasing your throughput at your facility, I think that's probably enough. Second is to increase producer income. This grant really has spelled out a level of detail that they want, with letters of support from producers who are going to use your facility. They call out toll processing in particular, and it seems like they have a preference for toll processing. That when you like break down what total percentage of your facility is doing just your own processing versus toll processing. So it's probably going to benefit people who do toll processing instead of buying and then processing and selling under their own brand as well. So if you can show that you're increasing producer income in some way. Third is to access new market or sales channels. I think that could be either through new products or through, you've been able to hit a certain scale where you're then more competitive to enter into new markets. I think the current administration has also shown that they care about things like the farm to school, even if that's not super well solidified. And it also, depending on what state you're in, aligns well with regional efforts. An interesting thing about this grant is that they specifically ask for letters of support from like people in government in your area, which is something that many grants specifically say they don't want, because oftentimes those are just rubber stamp letters from your senator that says, hey, we would love to get a grant in our area. And it's usually pretty meaningless. But for whatever reason, this grant wants you to have something from a senator or congressperson or a local representative. And so I think that aligns well with the idea of institutional sales. Some states are implementing new programs where public institutions are required to source a certain percentage of their products from local producers. So if you can show that your project is unlocking a market like that for the producers that you're working with, and it's aligned with state goals, and then you get a letter from a local representative that can affirm that and say that you're part of the state or the region or the county's development plan, right? I think that is where it could really be strong. So if you happen to be in that situation. The fourth one is to support process improvement. That feels pretty basic. They mention worker safety in the grant, so that's nice that they have that specifically called out and as its own review criteria. That's going to give you points. Improving your process, making you more efficient. The last two are the more interesting ones. The fifth is to support employee training of equipment operations, butchery skills, hazard analysis, and critical control points, which is HACCP, and sanitation standard operating procedures, which is SSOP, compliance, and achieve product specifications and consistency. I find this one interesting because this is for equipment only grant. And so to say that you're training butchery skills is interesting, but if it's aligned with your HACCP plan, overall food safety, you can make that case. And then the last one is to improve waste management. This is something that leading up to this application, I thought was going to be a pretty big emphasis with all the stuff with offal and like managing waste. I think that will also be a competitive style of application. So if you align with 5 of those 6 things, I think you're off on the right foot. But yeah, I think they do a good job of breaking down and letting people be able to explore this in detail before they get too far along on an application.
Yeah, that's really nice that they have all that information. And I noticed for a couple other programs we're going to talk about, they had some new resources out this year too. So for the MPEP grant, if someone has applied for it before and received it, can they apply again? And if they applied for it before and did not receive it, can they apply again?
Good questions. So if you've applied before and received it, yes, you can apply again as long as you don't have a currently active. Let me even look it up, because it's not just the MPEP. It's also, you can't have an active one in order to be eligible. But it goes beyond the MPEPs. I think it's also the MPERG and the local MCAP grants. If you have any of those as currently active, you are not eligible.
If you had those grants and you've finished them, you've closed that all out, then you can apply for this one. And before I forget, is this just for USDA inspected plants also?
No, you have to currently operate under an FSIS grant of inspection, a grant of inspection under a cooperative interstate shipment program, or a state meat and poultry inspection program with standards at least equal to federal inspection. So I'll give you the very specific wording. But as long as you're compliant with those, you're eligible. And you either have to be engaged with the primary processing of cattle for commercial markets or toll process and have been in operation for at least 1 year when you apply. So this is not like a startup, brand new facility opportunity.
Okay, go back to the question about if you've applied before and you didn't get it.
Yeah, I think grants, unfortunately, you can get disqualified for many reasons. And so if you have applied before and you didn't get it, I wouldn't take that as a sign that you're not a good fit. If you didn't get reviewer feedback when you originally didn't get it, I don't think it's too late. I would go back and find that email and specifically request the written reviewer notes. That's really helpful for you to understand, were you not a good fit for the program, or did you have a work plan that was difficult to understand, right? And the unfortunate thing about grants is that sometimes they want things in a specific format and you can lose a lot of points for just missing something silly. And, you could have a great fit for this new program and have just been disqualified. So I would definitely go back, ask for those reviewer notes and then analyze them. I'd be happy to take a look at the notes as well, help you think through if this new one is a better opportunity. Many people with grants don't get an application on their first time. I think you mentioned how that was the case for you with the LAMP grants, but then you just improve it based on those notes, and you can be a lot more competitive the second or maybe third time you apply.
So I was just looking here. It looks like there is a match requirement for both the expansion project, which would, like you said, include the contractors and the installation and everything, 50% match. There's also 25% match for the simplified equipment only projects, which I think is important for people to know. One question I had though is, let's say you're going to write out the whole processing expansion project application, that includes everything start to finish, including, the installation and everything. And as long as you've done all that work, can you go ahead and just simplify that to a simplified equipment only project and apply for both of those? Or do you need to pick one or the other for your application?
So they have a interesting thing here, which may answer that question. So they say applicants that are not eligible for funding are entities that have affiliates that are also submitting applications in circumstances which have shared ownership of more than 75%. And so you wouldn't be eligible to submit multiple applications, even in different businesses where there's too much shared ownership. So I have not seen them specifically say you can or can't submit multiple times, but I would interpret that to mean it's probably not worth it. It'd be choose which one. They also don't have separate funding pools. So I would say choose the one that you can tell the better story in and just do it. I would also say that even if you are going to do a simplified equipment only, I would still go through the same planning process to get all the quotes for all the installation and mention those things in your application. As a reviewer, it gives me a lot of confidence when somebody says, I'm aware I'm also going to have to spend an extra $50,000 on these costs, and they're not included in the grant, but I'm prepared to cover those costs. There are a lot of red flags when you're reviewing grants, but one of them is like everything is a round number, and there's 50,000 for this piece of equipment and 50,000 for this one and 100,000 for this. And you know that this is something back of the napkin. They don't actually know how much these things cost. They're kind of assuming. And then that's where if they get the award and then they go and they find out it actually is twice as much as they thought it would, that's where you aren't able to finish grants, and it really makes everybody unhappy.
That's a super good kind of insider tip. It's okay to round numbers occasionally, right? And estimate, but also don't make it, you need to make it obvious that you have done your research and that you are prepared to actually make these purchases or hire these contractors or that sort of thing. And I think that goes across the different grants that I've applied for too. If you're going to hire someone for marketing, which doesn't really apply to this grant at all, but I have looked up marketing jobs on Indeed and looked at what the salaries are in my area and then justified it that way, so that they know that I have done that research and prepared for that. So it sounds like MPEP is a really good opportunity this phase 4. I've also kind of heard through the grapevine that this is probably the last round of MPEP that we know of, at least. This was kind of a pandemic era, program. Obviously, the current administration is using it to align with their priorities right now, as you mentioned, in the beef sector especially. Do we anticipate any other local meat or local processing type programs coming up?
Right now, as of recording this, the Farm Bill is in process, right? I think it's passed through the House, but it hasn't passed through the Senate yet. And so that would really change a lot of the funding landscape as soon as we're able to get that through in some form, So I think we would know more after that is passed. But until then, I would say this is the last one you can't count on.
Okay, so listeners, if you have questions about MPEP, Stephen is your guy for this one. Now, moving into the LAMP grants, those are the Local Agriculture Marketing Program, I believe. The LAMP grants, those are ones that I'm much more familiar with. When is MPEP due? I don't think we said that yet.
We did not. It is due August 7th.
So if you were thinking about it, reach out to Stephen. You've got all summer to work on it compared to the LAMP grants, which are due, I believe, June 5th. The countdown. I need to put a big clock on my wall with the countdown of how many days, hours, minutes, that sort of thing. Go ahead, Stephen, give a little overview of the LAMP grants, and then maybe specifically, you and I were talking off air that they're not really necessarily the best fit for processors or producers, but there might be some tie-ins there. So give us an idea of who might qualify or who would be a good fit for that.
Yeah, definitely. So the LAMP grants, there are 3 primary programs that are going to be due in June. Funnily enough, the value-added producer grant is also part of this funding source, which we've talked about before and we're big fans of. For some reason, that one is handled under the Rural Development Office, whereas this one is handled under, I think, AMS. But there's the Farmers Market Promotion Program, the Local Food Promotion Program, and the Regional Food System Partnerships. The Regional Food System Partnerships is the newest one. I think it's only 2 or maybe 3 years old. And it's really a multi-organization partnership incubator. They really want to see these regional programs. Most of them are pretty big. I recognize a lot of the names of people who get awarded it, right? It tends to be larger organizations that are taking a very low and slow approach to developing relationships and developing coordination. They focus on things like regional food system planning and coordination. It can have things around policy alignment or governance, really focused on how many stakeholders can you bring to the table, and then long-term transformation of the food system. So it's coordination at a national level, strengthening your entire regional food system through collaboration, I'm sure there have been for-profits who have gotten it, but overwhelmingly, this is nonprofit, large nonprofit organizations, their agencies, things like that. So those ones, if you are eligible, you probably already know it, right? It's probably already on your radar, probably one of few sources that can provide such a large pot of money for the work that you're doing. Worth checking out, otherwise, or learning about it. I think that it's really powerful to be a participant. And a lot of these LAMP grants, I'd be interested to hear your experience, Katie, but I find things like MPEP, where it's equipment only, reimbursement style grant, or even the value added producer grant are far easier to administer, whereas these LAMP grants are federal grants that come with all the strings attached, all the red tape, and kind of like the things that people fear about grants, where it's, you put down the wrong number and you get disqualified. And so it's like, it's where it really begins in my experience. And so being a partner on one of these programs, particularly something like a regional food system partnership, is a great path forward. So finding the people who are already bringing people together in your region and seeing how can I be a small part of what they are doing will set you a line where you're not having to manage the grant. You just get to be a recipient, a participant. And then that also sets you up better. If you've been part of an RFSP, that sets you up well to then be more competitive for either the farmers market or the local food promotion program grants, because you can say, what I'm doing is aligned with this regional effort, and you've developed these stronger relationships and partnerships. So that's usually, if somebody's looking at LAMP for the first time, that's where I recommend they start, is trying to find somebody who's doing the RFSP work in your region and connecting with them.
I have not really been involved in RFSP. I know that there are some organizations, in Iowa that are involved, and I think I get emails for meetings, and I have sat in on some of them. I believe that they are through that, where it is, like you said, it's a little bit of a slower process, really working on connecting organizations and things like that. A lot of times those are half-day meetings, and I just have not been able to commit the time to it, which I suppose that's why you have a grant, is because if I were somehow being compensated for that time, that would allow me to then, it would become a priority and I would be able to commit some time to it. I also will say that as a for-profit, ChopLocal and ChopLocal University are not nonprofits, and there is a little bit of, I feel like I'm the black sheep in the room sometimes with people. And so that's not, I'm not criticizing anybody that's involved in any of the RFSPs, but I understand why they're a little bit hesitant to maybe partner with somebody who is a for-profit company versus a nonprofit. But I think that they do good work and definitely serve a purpose. So when I said I know the LAMP grants, I don't know that one. I do know Farmers Market Promotion Program grant, because that is how we launched ChopLocal University in early 2023. And then I know the Local Foods Promotion Program grant, because that is the grant that ChopLocal currently has that provides marketing on behalf of the producers that are selling on our marketplace. So those are the two that I know a lot better.
I can feel that at times where I'm a for-profit business, and when some rooms I get into, there's kind of like this feeling of, therefore I'm extractive, right? Or I'm trying to profiteer off of people, where it's like, well, I mean, nonprofits can still charge money. It just means that any extra profit they have to report on, in a specific way. I think there's been a big change in our industry where a lot of for-profits are doing impact-driven work and, building the industry, and it's very valid. So I know that the work you're doing is to the benefit of the producer. So you can come into a room with me anytime.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will also say, kind of to your point, I do think that the LAMP grants, these grant applications are a little bit intimidating, and it does feel like you said, if you enter something, if you go over the page limit or you don't put the right thing in the right spot, you can be disqualified immediately. And there's another grant program that I applied to recently, and I was actually traveling when it was due, and I asked, they needed a signature, and I said, is it okay for me to sign it electronically, or do I need to find a printer and print this out, sign it, and and scan it in, And I emailed the lady in charge of it, and she's like, "Oh, if it doesn't get signed now, we'll have you sign it afterwards." And I was like, USDA would never, like they would never let you get away with that. But my experience has been that after I received the grants and I started working with USDA's team and the grants management specialists that they've assigned to me, it has been really smooth sailing. They have been so helpful. And so that is one thing, that managing the grant has not been nearly as, there is work involved, there is paperwork involved, but anytime I run into any little bit of a question or a struggle, they have been there to help me, and they've really, really been helpful in that regard. So don't let that scare you guys off too much.
Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe that also informs how we design grants a lot of times. We usually will try to tell a very simple story in very direct and with a lot of certainty, maybe, unfortunately. I think a part of the challenge with things like these LAMP grants is that they are very particular about how they want you to talk about your impact. They say, all right, here's the list of like outputs or outcomes that you need to identify and say how many farmers will have increased income as a result of your work. And they want you to put specific numbers and specific dollar amounts. And I think a lot of people can get uncomfortable because you're saying, well, I don't know, maybe it could be this, or, and so with most grant applications, we try to be conservative, but also present with absolute confidence that we have this amazing plan in place. And then with the knowledge that usually in the administration, people are flexible and they're people too, right? They understand that things might change and they're trying to work with you. They've already bought into the mission and the story that you're telling. And yeah, they're usually great to work with on the back end. You just got to get it first, right? Let me give you a quick overview of the way that I think about it. Between the Farmers Market Promotion Program and the Local Food Promotion Program is if the farmer is talking and interacting directly with their market, right? Both of them are focused on building more profitable businesses for farms, building like middle of the value chain, regional food systems. So for something like the Farmers Market Promotion Program, think of it like a farmer's market where the project is focused on helping farmers to talk to their customer directly. Or, Katie, it makes sense that you got it because you have a website where consumers can see the farm directly and talk to them and order directly from them, right? You're facilitating kind of that direct access. And then the Local Food Promotion Program is more intermediate markets. So it could be more of the food hub or an aggregator, people who are doing aggregation, distribution, processing. It could be a processing facility. So when we were talking a little bit offline before we got going, that technically meat processors are eligible. And when you read the program, it would be a good fit. Unfortunately, I was looking at the awards from last year, and I think 4 out of the 37 had the word meat in the project, and none of them were actual like processing facilities. And I think this is something that happens when there are other funding programs. There's kind of a mediating effect where then the reviewers, whether it's formal or informal, will say, hey, they're getting funding from the MPEP program or the local MCAP program, so let's prioritize these other projects. And so I think that that's likely to happen again this year. And so in general, we saw a really big influx of money into the LAMP programs around 3 or 4 years ago with like COVID era funding. We've seen like a trend in the office moving between wanting to award a lot of smaller grants and a smaller number of bigger grants. And part of that, to simplify it overly, would be they think about the impact per dollar spent. And usually when you do a large number of smaller grants, your impact per dollar is smaller because you're working with smaller organizations who are more expensive to operate and they get to do less, versus think of it as a larger, like even within farming, right? It's like the small farm is more expensive because they just have more overhead per unit sold, versus when they do these larger awards to a smaller number of groups, then it's really focused on these larger nonprofits who are more efficient with providing services, and they can really claim these huge impact numbers of we've impacted this many farms per dollar. And right now it seems like they're in a tightening phase. So that meaning there's less money overall in the program because we've lost a lot of that COVID money. And, we haven't had the new farm bill that might increase the amount of funding available. And they've, over the last couple of years, been generally shrinking to a smaller number of bigger awards. Last year, the vast majority of awards were on the larger end. For most people, it's not probably the best fit, right? If you've never applied for it before and you haven't started yet, so it'd be a 3-week mad dash to try to get it in. And this grant really prioritizes letters of support and partnerships. Like I mentioned, the RFSP, it's like that's the only focus. Even in the FMPP, LFPP grants, they heavily value letters from partners showing that there's a lot of people involved, that this isn't just an idea that you've come up with. All of them, you have to show that it benefits lots of different businesses. So if you're a processor, that can be that you process for 20 farms and they are benefiting, but it could also be, you want to show that it's a much broader impact than just your own business, even if you are the one benefiting the most. Just think about how there's going to be competition where it's a nonprofit and they're benefiting a little bit because they're working, but they're not like profiting as much. And so all of the work, all of the money is going to benefiting others. So just think that that's your competition. Even if you are eligible and have a good project, the competition is really stiff. A lot of nonprofits have lost their funding this year or, over the last couple of years. And so all of them are like being more likely to apply for any funding that's available. And so then you just have an increased amount of competition. So if you've applied before, you have the materials already developed, it can be worth putting in an application. But if you haven't really started working on it and have a clear idea, it's probably not worth rushing to the finish. But I would also say I'd be happy to chat with anybody and talk it through. And there might be other programs that are a better fit for what your goals are as well.
Yeah, so both of these programs really focus on marketing dollars. Marketing to grow the local foods piece. And there are some nuances between the difference between the two, which is something that I really struggled with for a long time. But one of them on Farmers Market Promotion Program is you can use it for training and technical assistance of farmers, which is where ChopLocal University falls in too, because those are our trainings, that sort of thing. So one audience that I think might be a good fit for this would be and I know that they are eligible, cooperatives, producer cooperatives, or producer organizations that want to provide either assistance with their producers, marketing their products. I'm thinking about, there's one state organization in particular that is for a specific species that is creating like kind of a joint marketing venture where they are pushing out, to their, so Steven's nodding his head, but that might be a really good fit, right? So I think that there are some people listening that don't take everything that Steven said and be like, no, it's not worth it. I know there's only 3 weeks left. But the other thing I will go back and say, and the reviewers might hate me for this, is get something in and get feedback. And you might not get it this year, but this has happened to me twice now, where I did Scouts Honor. I did the best job that I could at the time with the skills that I had and the partnerships that I had. And I put in my application, got the feedback, and that's what led to a successful application the next year. So if you have 3 weeks, do something, do something decent. Don't waste reviewers' time, but get some feedback for next year, potentially.
I think what you're saying makes so much sense, where it's, especially if you might be a good fit for this next year, if you spent the next year slowly developing your idea and developing those partnerships. So even if you got something in and got feedback, or if you just use this as an opportunity to think about what you would submit for, and then start reaching out to those partners and developing like what we call memorandum of understanding, like partnership letters where you have an established way of working together and partnering. Getting that process, it's so long to get that process done well. And so start that now, and then you're actually prepared when when the next opportunity comes up as well. But yeah, marketing, shared marketing, great fit for it.
Yeah, and unlike MPEP, these are more like value-added producer grant, where we can pretty much rely on the idea that they are going to come around again next year. So if you do work right now and you don't get it done, you're not able to complete an application that feels like it's worth, turning in, chances are you're still laying the groundwork for when this opens up next year. If you dive in and you start understanding what this application is looking for, that helps you throughout the entire year start to, even if you're not getting to the point of an MOU or a memorandum, with partners, you can start to identify who those partners might be and start building that relationship and that sort of thing. I feel like I said, my knowledge of grants has grown so much over the last few years, but it's all because I dove in head first the first time, and it didn't happen just by accident. It's happened gradually and by kind of getting in the room with the people who are knowledgeable about these types of things and getting the feedback. So, Stephen, are there any other good opportunities right now, or any other opportunities that you're anticipating opening up, that will be opening up for in kind of the local or direct to consumer space?
I've been most recently pleasantly surprised by the number of state level programs that have been happening. There's been a number of state programs that are brand new this year. I think we're starting to see some states respond to the way that federal funding was pooled. And so that is going to be very dependent on where you're located. We do have a free grant alert system, so I would encourage you to sign up for that. And any that we come across, we would send your way. It's a free service. We don't use your data for anything. Just we're doing the work anyways and would love to keep people informed. Other than that, on a federal level, I was pleasantly surprised last year with the farm to school grants still moving forward. Those actually feel kind of more accessible from my perspective. There are SARE grants, which are focused on like on-farm research and or education, farm-to-farmer education. Those are always very popular. My favorite is the value-added producer grant. If you sell something that you produce within 400 miles of where you produce it, that's considered a value-added product. So, almost 100% of the farmers that we work with have that. Unless you're a completely commodity cropper, you likely would qualify for that program, and that's annual as well. Yeah, I'd say I'm just watching the Farm Bill, and I try not to follow it too much because I think it's one of those things where it's so drawn out. You get excited and then you just spend a lot of time waiting. So I am excited to see what happens with that. There is, like you said, I'm pretty sure the LAMP programs are in the current iteration. And so if it passed as it is currently, they would be coming back next year. I would keep out for that and then sign up for the grant alerts and keep informed like that.
Okay, so everybody can sign up for the grant alerts at stewardsunlimited.com. Reach out to Stephen if you have questions. He's obviously a great resource on these grants. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Stephen, for hopping on here and going over these. Again, MPEP is not due until August 7th, so that's a great opportunity. These LAMP grants are due, I think, June 5th, so you got a little bit less time to work on those, but still might be a good fit for your organization.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Katie. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Meat Success. We hope this episode gave you fresh insights and inspiration to beef up your meat marketing. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, follow us on social, and share with your fellow farmers and butchers. Have questions or ideas for future podcasts? Reach out to ChopLocalUniversity.com. Until next time, remember, there's more than one recipe for meat success.